بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سورة المائدة آية number 89. قال الله تعالى: لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان فكفارته إطعام 10 مساكين من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم أو كسوتهم أو تحرير رقبة فمن لم يجد فصيام 3 أيام ذلك كفارة أيمانكم إذا حلفتم واحفظوا أيمانكم كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تشكرون. So he says, لا يؤاخذكم, from آخذ يؤاخذ, to punish. Allah will not punish you or take you to account for the laghu in your ayman. So ayman, plural of yameen, meaning an oath, and al-laghu here means those oaths which you do not actually intend, meaning it runs off the tongue without the meaning being intended. An oath is taken by the name of Allah, or one of His names, or one of His attributes, using the harf or the letter of the yameen, which is wallahi, or billahi, or tallahi. He says, but He will take you to account for your deliberate oaths. So aqadtum, from aqada yu'aqidu ta'aqidan, this means to put a transaction into effect. It could be a business transaction, it could be a marital transaction, and in the case of an oath, it is to make an oath and you actually firmly intend to fulfill the oath thereby. So if a person says, Wallahi, I will go shopping tomorrow, and he intends thereby to actually go shopping, he means what he says. So if he does not go shopping, then the alternative is to offer the kaffara. Kaffara, from kafara, to cover. Because a kaffara covers your sins and wards off the punishment from you. Then he gives us the kaffara if you do not fulfill the oaths which you actually intended to fulfill. It is it'am, to give food to 10 masakin, 10 poor people. And what is apparent here is 10 different poor people. A poor person is one who does not have the basic needs to suffice himself and his dependents. Such a person is also eligible for the zakah. But this must be a poor person who cannot earn for himself. If a poor person is able to earn because they are strong enough to do so, then they must do so. They are not allowed to take from zakah or any other kafara payment, as giving them just encourages them to be lazy. Indeed, it is not permissible for such people to ask others for wealth if they are able to earn themselves. But what is it that you feed them? Min awsati ma tut'imuna ahlikum, from the awsat, from the average of what you feed your family. So basically, the average meal that you would eat, that's the type and the level of food that you give to each poor person. So you could do that, or you have another choice, aw kiswatuhum, or clothing them. Kasa yaksu means to clothe someone. Now, what type of clothes are these going to be? Whatever in the customs is considered clothing someone, then this would count. So we need to look at the customs, because what is deemed to be clothing is different in different cultures and customs. If, for example, you just gave them a pair of sandals, then no one really in the customs is going to say that this is clothing. So clothing needs to be generally where the whole body is covered, or most of the body at least. Some sort of upper garment, some sort of lower garment, and some type of footwear. So here you are going to clothe 10 poor people. The word aw, meaning or, is giving us a choice. You can do this or you can do that. And there's a third option, aw tahriru raqabatin, or that you can tahrir. Hur means free, so tahrir means to make free. Raqaba literally means a neck. Here it means a servant. Now it is worth pointing out that this servant must be a believing servant, not a kafir servant. And this is because of the hadith of Muawiyah ibn al-Hakam, where he hit his servant girl, and the Prophet told him, أَعْتِقْهَا فَإِنَّهَا مُؤْمِنَةٌ, free her because she is a mu'minah. So which means that if she was not a mu'minah, then you do not free her. And then rationally thinking about it, if you free a kafir servant, he's just going to join his kuffar comrades and strengthen their number. Whereas in freeing a Muslim servant, this is an act of great ihsan, great good doing, because now this Muslim who is free can worship Allah Jalla wa Ala more fully, and he is unrestricted. So you're actually helping someone worship Allah Jalla wa Ala. You also notice that with these three options, it goes from the easiest to the hardest, and you may choose whichever one you want. Then he says, whoever does not find what exactly? Find the ability to perform the previous three acts, any one of them. If you're unable to do any one of the previous three acts, then and only then you go for this option where he says فَصِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ, fasting 3 days. And this is just a normal Shara'i fast. But the question is, are these 3 consecutive days, or could they be non-consecutive? And there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars here. In ayah number 92 of Surah An-Nisa, which we dealt with, the kafara of accidental killing was that if you cannot free a servant, then it is to fast 2 consecutive months. شهرين متتابعين. So some scholars would say that because the ruling here in this ayah of the oaths is the same, that is to say the order to fast, we carry the mutlaq on the muqayyad, so that we also fast 3 consecutive days. And we are allowed to do this if the ruling is the same. The mutlaq, the absolute or unrestricted, is understood in the light of the restricted. The kafara of the qatl is restricted, 2 consecutive months. There's the restriction. Also, to back up this argument, the qira'ah, the recitation of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, also says 3 consecutive days for the kafara of the yameen. So the 3 consecutive days, even though this qira'ah is shadda, it is anomalous, we would understand it to be Ibn Mas'ud's tafsir of this ayah. And a third point to back this argument is that it is the safest option. 3 consecutive days is definitely safer. You're on the safe side. No one can say that you've done anything wrong. Whereas if you did not do it consecutively, then some scholars may deem this action to be wrong. And then the other opinion is that because this ayah does not make the restriction of consecutiveness, so we should not make the restriction of consecutiveness. So the mas'ala here is ijtihadiyah. No one should be blamed for what option they take, but to be on the safe side, as a recommendation, we say fast 3 days in a row. Okay, when should you fast? Is it immediately, or can you delay it? Well, the answer is this is a debt upon you, and you have to do it before you die. But definitely the recommendation is to do it immediately, as quickly as you can, to discharge this obligation from you. And you do not know, if you delay, you might end up forgetting. And the asl, the default position for every obligation, is that it needs to be done as soon as is possible. ذَلِكَ, that is the kafara of your ayman, of your oaths, إِذَا حَلَفْتُمْ, when you swear, meaning when you swear an oath. But actually, it's not just when you swear an oath, it's when you swear an oath and then break it. So, إِذَا حَلَفْتُمْ وَحَنِثْتُمْ. But وَحَنِثْتُمْ, which means to not fulfill your oath, is missing because it is well known that the kafara is only when you do not fulfill the oath. That is the hinth. And he also gives us an order, وَحْفَظُوا أَيْمَانَكُمْ, guard your oaths. So hifz is to guard. But what does that mean? It can mean a few things. Number 1, it can mean do not make hinth, meaning when you take the oath, actually fulfill it. Do not break it. Secondly, it can mean that if you were to not fulfill your oath, then do not neglect in giving the kafara. Thirdly, it can mean do not take oaths much, meaning on any little trivial matter. Rather only take it in major matters, when you have to emphasize something important. Because if people are taking oaths left, right and center, then it just makes the oath by Allah look and sound cheap with people, and this is wrong. Oaths need to be heavy and expensive. And then he says, كذلك, meaning just like that, Allah makes yubayyin, meaning bayan, clarity, or makes plain, to you His ayat, talking about the ayat of the Quran, لعلكم, so that you may, this is ta'leel, tashkurun, make shukr, or give thanks. So he's telling us, just like you have found this ayah telling you clearly what to do in your oaths, so just like this, Allah makes plain and clear to you His ayat in the Quran, so that you can give Him thanks for making plain His ayat and being clear, as opposed to being ambiguous and creating confusion in your minds. As for shukr, then thanking Allah Jalla wa'ala simply means obeying Him in the way He has dictated, and that is done with the heart, that you feel the ni'mah of Allah, and that Allah is your sole benefactor. You believe it and feel it. It's done on the tongue, that you praise Allah Jalla wa'ala using your tongue, and you make mention of His grace on you by way of giving credit to Allah, and it is done on the limbs by way of physical acts of ibadah. Okay, let us reflect on ayah number 89. We pick up the mercy and the grace of Allah Jalla wa'ala in that He does not take us to account on those oaths which we take and do not really intend it, and that they run on the tongue. Otherwise, He could have easily said, no, you are to be taken to account even for the oaths which are said through mistake. And this would actually be perfectly reasonable, because you can argue that you have to watch exactly what you say, because you are responsible for every word that leaves your mouth. In the same way, if you hold a gun, you are responsible for every bullet that leaves the gun as long as the gun is in your hand. And it does not serve you to say that my finger accidentally hit the trigger. We also learn of the kafara of the yameen. Now this kafara applies to those oaths which you do not fulfill, which are about a matter you are to perform in the future, and the matter is possible to be performed. If somebody says, Wallahi, I will fly in the air tomorrow, naturally, then this is obviously impossible. Humans cannot fly in the air naturally. Now some scholars say that obviously this is impossible, and so he has immediately broken the oath and he has to offer the kafara. And there are other scholars who say that for something like this, which is clearly and obviously impossible, this oath counts for nothing and there is no kafara. Because the oath for which there is a kafara needs to be something to be done in the future, and it is possible to be done. We also find that not fulfilling your oath is a sin. That's why you have to offer the kafara, and a kafara is only for a sin. And what results from this is that if somebody does not fulfill the oath due to a preventative factor out of his control, then he is not sinful, and therefore there is no kafara. For example, he says, Wallahi, I will do shopping tomorrow, but then he falls ill tomorrow all day and is unable to move out of bed. So that means he did not fulfill his oath. However, he is not sinful, and therefore there is no kafara. Or even if he forgetfully breaks the oath. For example, he says, Wallahi, I will not wear this particular shirt ever again. And then he wears the shirt forgetfully, meaning he forgot that he took his oath. There is no kafara upon him, because if you commit a sin forgetfully, meaning you forgot it was a sin, then it is not actually a sin on you. Or maybe he was ignorant. Perhaps it is dark and he cannot see too well, and he mistakes the forbidden shirt for a permissible shirt and he wears it. So again, this is not intentionally committing the sin, and therefore there is no kafara on him. Just like if he were to commit a sin out of ignorance, it would not be a sin on him. We also note the word it'am. It means to feed. It does not mean to give someone money so they can buy themselves food. No, rather you purchase the food for them. This is it'am. Also, what is apparent is that feeding is the normal feeding with normal food. So you cannot feed a breastfeeding baby some milk. This is not what is apparent. They need to be people who can actually eat with their teeth. or with a straw if they are adults and do not have any teeth, but they originally would be eating. If you can only find, let's say, 6 or 7 poor people, which is of course less than 10, then you have to opt for the other option, which is to fast 3 days. Notice also the balance in this deen of Al-Islam, where he says you feed them from the average of what you feed yourself. Because if you were to give them poor quality food, then this would be a transgression against the poor people. And if you were required to give the very best type of your food, then this would be hard upon you. So look how Islam takes the balanced middle path. We also notice something about numbers. He tells us to feed or clothe 10 poor people, yet the other option is to fast 3 days. Should it not be to fast 10 days? So 1 day for every poor person you would have fed or clothed? Because that seems to be the case for the dhihar. The one who makes the dhihar and then wants to have intercourse with his wife must fast 2 consecutive months. If he is unable to do so, he must feed 60 poor people. If we say 2 consecutive months is 30 days at most, then that would be 60 days, and so 60 poor people would be a 1-to-1 ratio. And that is the same ratio with the one who has intercourse with his wife during the daytime of Ramadan. Yet in this ayah we do not have that ratio. So what does this all mean? It all means that these numbers and particular details are all down to Allah Jalla wa Ala. Whether they make sense to us or not is irrelevant. You may argue that with the kafara of the dhihar, the fasting is a badal for the feeding, and so it takes a 1-to-1 ratio, whereas in this ayah, the fasting is not a badal. It does not take the place of the feeding, rather it is a separate and independent kafara, and Allah knows best. We also learn the obligation of respecting the oaths and guarding them, and we explained what that meant earlier. We also learn that Allah makes bayan. He puts us into clarity about what He requires from us, and He makes His ayat of the Quran clear. And the reason why He does that is that we may give thanks, and we explained what that meant as well. We also learn that if you gain knowledge, then you need to thank Allah for this. How come? Because Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us that He has made plain these ayat so that we may be thankful. But our knowledge comes from the fact that He has made plain His ayat. How else can we attain knowledge unless the ayat are made plain to us? So when you acquire knowledge, this is a ni'mah from Allah. It comes because He has made His ayat plain to us, and therefore we must give thanks for this ni'mah. Ayah number 90. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu innama al-khamru wal-maysiru wal-ansabu wal-azlamu rijsun min amali ash-shaytani fajtanibuhu la'allakum tuflihun. So he calls out with the famous call, O you who believe, innama harful hasr, meaning only. So he says al-khamr, that is what clouds your intellect by way of pleasure. It does not have to be a drink, of course. It could be anything which clouds your intellect by way of pleasure. It could be an injection or something other than that. Of course, anesthetics in hospitals are not from khamr, even though they do cloud the intellect and you lose consciousness, but it is not by way of pleasure. As for maysir, from yusr, meaning ease, it means gambling, because with gambling you win the money with ease. You do not need to make an effort. With gambling, if you win at somebody else's expense. So there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. This is the hallmark of gambling. Wal ansab, these are statues which are erected from nasb, which means to erect. These are erected for the worship of other than Allah. These can also refer to stone altars which are obviously vertically up erected, where they would sacrifice for their false gods. And he says, wal azlam, these are arrows. And when a person wanted to undertake a particular action, on one arrow he would write do it, and another arrow he would write do not do it, and another arrow he would write nothing on it. And then they will put the arrows in a bag, shake it up, so each arrow has equal chance of being chosen. It's like drawing lots really. and then whichever arrow comes up, he would obey that instruction. If he chooses the arrow in which there is no writing, he would repeat the process. This is of course the Jahiliyyah way. Allah Jalla wa Ala chose for us a superior way, which is if we want to undertake an action, we pray Salatul Istikhara and we seek advice from those who are trustworthy. This is the proper way. One might object and say, but is drawing lots not permissible? The answer is, if we have two or more people who are vying for a position or a place or a job, and they are equally qualified in doing so, then they may draw lots. Such as when the people wanted to look after Maryam in the Masjid al-Aqsa. They drew lots, and Zakaria alayhi salam won the lot, so he was in charge of Maryam. So this is when you have two or more people vying for a place, a position, or some sort of job, that sort of thing. But as for if it's just you and you're deciding on a matter and you're not sure, then drawing lots in this way is from the matters of Jahiliyyah, and similar to it would be something like tossing a coin. Heads you do it, tails you do not. This is exactly of the same nature as the Azlam. He says all of these are rijis, which means najis or impurity. So this is spiritually impure. We can say sin or evil. Min amal shaitan. It is an impurity from the works of shaitan. Meaning it is shaitan who is the one who incites people to commit these types of impure actions. Every sin is spiritually impure. So an order is given, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, from اجتنب يجتنب اجتنابًا, to avoid it, meaning avoid all of what has preceded, لَعَلَّكُمْ, so that you may, تُفْلِحُونَ, be successful, meaning successful in this world and in the hereafter. Ayah number 91, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَنْ يُوقِعَ بَيْنَكُمْ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ فِي الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ وَيَصُدَّكُمْ عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون. Again, it begins with the word إنما, only, meaning shaitan only wants to يوقع, from أوقع يوقع إيقاعا, which means to make something happen or to make something drop. So here it means he only wants to excite al-adawa, enmity, wal-baghda, and hatred between you. Fil khamri wal maysir, using the khamr and the maysir, because khamr, when people get drunk, it incites enmity between them and hatred. And also with gambling, when one person wins at the expense of the other, the loser is going to feel enmity and hatred against the winner. He's going to feel like he's got his one-up over me. So these are two tools of shaitan to incite enmity and hatred between the believers. And we can make analogy with anything else which has the same effect. Because khamr and maysir are not exhaustive lists, they are just examples. And also from the effects of khamr and maysir, وَيَصُدَّكُمْ, and to divert you from the dhikr of Allah and from the salah. Because these matters of khamr and maysir, these are addictive matters. They're going to make you forget remembering Allah Jalla wa Ala and the salah. And so likewise, anything else which has the same effect has the same ruling. It would be haram. And then he asks the question, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ, are you going to muntahun, from intaha yantahi, to refrain from something? Are you going to refrain? And of course the natural answer to this question is yes, of course we are going to refrain if these are the evil effects of khamr and maysir and the like thereof. So reflecting on both of these ayat 90 and 91, we take obviously the hurma of these four items, khamr, maysir, ansab and azlam, and anything which would resemble them in nature as well, in terms of their evil effects, which has been mentioned in the ayah. And we notice that because he calls out to the believers, it means that refraining from these haram actions is a sign of your iman. If a believer engages in any of these actions, then either he has no iman or deficient iman. So a Muslim can certainly be drinking khamr, for example, and that just shows that he has deficient iman. But we cannot make takfir on such a person. Some scholars have used this ayah to conclude that khamr is najis. So if you have khamr on your clothing, you are not allowed to pray in these particular clothing. But this is incorrect. Khamr is najis not physically but spiritually, like all sins are impure, but not in the physical sense, in the spiritual sense. Therefore, if you have khamr on your clothing, it is not physically impure. You are indeed allowed to pray in this particular clothing. Likewise, if you put on perfume which has some khamr, then you're still allowed to pray. It is not necessary to wash off this particular perfume or aftershave. We also find that gambling is haram, even if it be gambling with small amounts of wealth and things which you do not really desire, because gambling is still gambling. We also find that refraining from all haram actions, not just these 4 mentioned in the ayah, but all haram actions, is a means for success, because he says لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. This will be success in this life and in the hereafter. So what is success? Success is that which you desire and is beneficial for you. So in this life, people desire financial stability, and that is also beneficial. They desire peace and tranquility. They desire to be able to deal with and solve problems in life. All of this is part of success, and in the hereafter, your success would be being raised in degrees in Jannah. And all of this happens when you refrain from the sinful actions and you fight against the temptations of the shaitan. We also learn that the shaitan wants to incite enmity between the Muslimin and hatred, and he also wants to divert and distract us from the remembrance of Allah on our tongues and our hearts, and also to divert us from the salah. And this is because he is an open enemy to us, and he wants evil for us. Whereas on the other hand, we find that Allah Jalla wa'ala is a well-wisher to us. He wants the best in this world and in the hereafter for us. And also, it is entirely possible for us to make analogy with these 4 haram actions and say that anything which will lead to division and enmity and hatred and distraction from the dhikr of Allah in our hearts and in our tongues, and also distraction from the salah, anything of the sort is haram, and from the evil impurities of the works of shaitan. In other words, this is what the shaitan wants to incite and tempt us with. هذا والله أعلم.